All right, welcome. This is Unit 2, or excuse me, Unit 3.
Don't sound like that.
Well, Unit 2 is okay.
And this is the question we'd like to address tonight. Number 2, how did the southern states justify their decision to secede from the United States? How did President Lincoln and other Northerners justify treating secession as an act of rebellion? Why do you think secession has historically been viewed as unacceptable? Please begin.
In 2006, Justice Antonin Scalia remarked that if there was any constitutional issue resolved by the Civil War, it is that there was no right to secede. The debate over the right to leave the Union had an enduring presence in early American politics. The Confederacy justified secession by using the language of the Declaration of Independence and insisting upon the state's continuing sovereignty. Northerners responded to this by asserting that the United States was a perpetual union first created by the Articles of Confederation and later reinforced by the constitutional invocation that to form a more perfect union, that union must be whole.
Following the election of Republican Abraham Lincoln without a single southern state, the region feared for the total demise of its power and slavery along with it. The seceded states subscribed to the compact theory, wherein the Constitution was read as we the states instead of we the people. The Articles of Confederation further supported this, as they declared that each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence. The Confederacy went even further in its constitutional justifications. In 1881, Jefferson Davis said that the federal government was in disregard of the limitations of the Constitution, and thus destructive of the principles of the Declaration of Independence.
Since the South believed owning slaves to be a constitutional right, they saw the Northern violations of the Fugitive Slave Clause as being contrary to the founding principles of the Union. From this and other perceived infractions, they found justification for rebellion within the Declaration. A section of the document steeped in Locke's right to revolution was even quoted by South Carolina's Declaration of Secession, that it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish an arbitrary government.
In his first inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln found that secession would make the Union less perfect than before the Constitution, having lost the vital element of perpetuity. In asserting the strength of the bonds forming the United States, the North justified treating secession as a rebellion rather than a principled revolution, a position further supported by the incongruity of owning slaves being a fundamental right. Lincoln used this reasoning to justify the suspension of habeas corpus without any congressional approval, the institution of an illegal naval blockade, and the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation, none of which were strictly constitutional.
Following the war, radical Republicans introduced a plethora of legislation intended to punish the former Confederacy. Among these measures were 3 constitutional amendments, which collectively gave slaves freedom, citizenship, and the vote, as well as providing for the supremacy of the federal government by bearing the phrase, "Congress shall have power to enforce the article by appropriate legislation." In fixing the potentially fatal flaws of the Constitution, this legislation promoted the ideals of the Declaration over any Southern justifications, and in the words of Justice Thurgood Marshall, in its place arose a new, more promising basis for justice and equality.
Despite negative views on leaving the Union, broader historical opinions of secession have certainly never been against the concept itself. Theodore Roosevelt aided Panama in its secession from Colombia, while the Union did not interfere with West Virginia's separation from Virginia. The argument can even be made that secession is one of the founding principles of this nation, seeing how it was built on the seceded lands of France, England, and Mexico.
Separation from the United States itself, however, has invariably been viewed as unacceptable. In response to South Carolina's 1832 Ordinance of Nullification, Andrew Jackson said that secession may be morally justified, but to call it a constitutional right is confounding the meaning of terms. Jackson established a clear distinction between the right to a principled revolution and willful secession from what the 1869 case of Texas v. White described as an indestructible union.
The nature of the United States as indestructible has often been tested by the Union's own founding principles, most recently when states used the Declaration of Independence in petitions to secede following the re-election of Barack Obama. However, history has resoundingly denounced the notion that the best way to further the meaning of the Declaration lies in the dissolution of the very Union it helped to form. Thank you.
Is the Civil War really over, or did Lee just surrender to Grant?
While many historians make the argument that the Civil War And for that matter, Reconstruction didn't really end until the election of Barack Obama in 2008. Really the means behind this argument is that because we had to go through so many years of turmoil in order to get an African American in the highest office in the land, we were still fighting up until the day that President Obama took his first inaugural address.
The Civil War presented a series of constitutional issues that were unprecedented. Now, I'd say that the Civil War has definitively been over since the surrender of Lee. As we mentioned in our testimony, Antonin Scalia said that there is no right to secession, and that was established by this war. One of the main questions before the war, going from the Philadelphia Convention, was what is the nature of this union? Do we have the right to secede from this body?
If the first three words of the Constitution had been "we the states," would the South have had a stronger argument?
Yes, because the South used the 10th Amendment as justification for secession, because since slavery was never fully or explicitly stated in the Constitution, they felt it was their right to declare what it was. So with "we the states," it therefore furthered their argument.
An interesting thing about the original draft of the Constitution is that it originally says "we the people of the states," and then it lists all 13 states at the time. This clearly says that one of the original intents of the founders was to have a confederation of states rather than what we now view as a single republic. This is further supported by the document's multiple references to the various states of the Union.
In addition, the phrase "we the states" really hints at a more explicit compact theory between the states, i.e. a contract between each individual state that they will uphold and follow the Constitution of the United States.
What were the requirements for states to get back into the Union, and what does that say about the status of states?
Well, with Andrew Johnson taking office after Abraham Lincoln, he required the Southern states to ratify the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, along with creating a new state constitution outlawing slavery.
Furthermore, a certain percentage of the citizens of the state had to take an oath to uphold the United States. Now, originally under the Wade-Davis bill, this was a much higher percentage. However, it was gradually lowered to the 10% that they eventually saw.
Was the South provoked to start the Civil War?
Absolutely. The southern states were highly dependent on the slave labor. Why, in just Alabama alone, slaves accounted for 42% of the entire white people's income. So it's no wonder why the southern states viewed any limitations on their slave owners' property as a potentially catastrophic threat to their economic system.
I'm going to have to agree with my colleague Casey and say in the Declaration, in Mississippi's Declaration of Secession, they said a blow at slavery is a blow at civilization and commerce. Slavery was their lifestyle. It was how they got their money. It was their economy. So by this broken compact that the South felt the North was violating, they felt that they were taking their lifestyle away from them.
I'm actually going to have to go ahead and disagree with both of my colleagues, particularly because of the manner through which the states seceded. Secession was not a result of a long struggle to allow the federal government to realize the ordeals of the southern states. There was no petition of grievances. There was no really method to secession. It was essentially looking at the presidential election and realizing that Abraham Lincoln had won without a single Southern vote and believing that that was grounds to leave the Union entirely.
Okay. I want to ask you a question about something else related to this. What do you think should be the limit on the president's authority in wartime? And did President Lincoln exceed these limits? Why or why not?
Well, Lincoln said, when justifying his suspension of habeas corpus before Congress July 4th, he said, "Must all of the laws but this one go to pieces while the Union falls away?" Basically, what he's saying here is that while we choose not to follow any of the laws, the habeas corpus law is essentially held to as this golden constitutional standard. Now, he felt the need to violate this in the face of the greater threat of the dissolution of the Union.
Abraham Lincoln had every justification to suspend the writ of habeas corpus and with his Emancipation Proclamation because, outlined in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, he is the commander and chief. Additionally, the Congress was not in session at the time, So therefore, with his commander-in-chief powers, he had the justification.
I'm actually going to disagree, particularly because President Lincoln seemed to almost throw the Constitution out the window for the entire period of the Civil War. Although he is the commander-in-chief, he does not have the right under the Constitution to suspend habeas corpus during wartime. That power is given very explicitly to Congress. And although Congress was not in session, he was capable under the Constitution of declaring an emergency session, which he did not do until 2 months after the fact.
Speaking on that note, do you think President Lincoln abused his power in pardoning the southern states?
To a certain extent, he did. I mean, they had very obviously committed rather egregious war crimes, and secession is not something that should have been treated lightly. However, at the same time, we have to see what the radical Republicans and the more strict Reconstruction did to the South. Ultimately, it resulted in things like the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws that were definitely not beneficial at all.
I'd like you to comment on this statement. Had the South not felt it necessary to try and break up the government, there would have been no need for war. All the people that wound up dying for the South died for a poor cause.
Can you repeat the quote, please?
Sure. Had the South not felt it necessary to try and break up the government, there would have been no need for war, and all the people who wound up dying for the South died for a poor cause.
Well, I definitely have to agree with that. In Federalist 6, Alexander Hamilton said that to look for a continuation of harmony between a series of non-interconnected bodies would be to disregard the course of human events. Now, when the South decided to secede from the Union without really much provocation, they were essentially bringing this conflict forward from what could have happened on a much more diplomatic scale.
However, at the same time, we have to realize that the ultimate cause in the whole grand scheme of things was ultimately the freedom of an entire race of people. All of the people that died in the Civil War, particularly on the Union side, were fighting for human rights, and ultimately that's a very beneficial thing.
Should Lincoln just have let the South go without trying to bring them back in and and not even, just let them go and let them start their own country?
Absolutely not, for a few key reasons. First of all, the South had a very big impact on the country, the economy of the United States as a whole, particularly because of their cotton trade with Europe. And because of that trade, because of the economic interests embodied in the southern states, it would have been absolutely foolish not to try and get these states back within the Union where they would be benefiting the economy of the United States as a whole.
I'd have to agree. The concept behind secession from the United States is that we are a series of unconnected bodies that can essentially secede from this confederacy. When Lincoln said that, when Lincoln decided to go to war with the South to preserve the Union, he was essentially saying that you cannot secede from this Union. If he hadn't, then it is very probable that eventually the South would have broken up and we would be left with an extremely divided continent.
Additionally, you can look to George Washington's farewell address of 1796. He stated, "To the efficacy and permanency of your Union, a government for the whole is indispensable." This just goes to show that the framers had no intention of letting or a separation of the two. Their intentions were to keep the Union whole.
Was military reconstruction after the Civil War a failure or a success in your opinion?
It was absolutely a failure. If you look at what came out of Reconstruction, it was nothing beneficial at all. We ended up with things like Jim Crow laws that really prohibited all of the new rights that African Americans got.
Additionally, there was a group of whites that called the Redeemers that tried to prevent any African Americans from gaining any political positions, and this led to the Jim Crow laws.
I'd have to disagree with my colleagues. The Civil War was an unprecedented conflict. It presented constitutional issues that were unthought of at the time. Yes, they were lingering, but they did not have any precedent. So when we try to bring this union back together, it's going to be messy. And I'm just saying that, it's going to be messy. So it happened. We brought the union back together and we're here today.
We'll let you stop there.
Thank you.
Sure thing. Because I am not an expert in the Constitution and I didn't even take it with people, I'm going to discuss much more your guys' presentation. That's something that I do understand. Your balance was a lot better than the last time I watched you, but still needs work. Amanda, stop answering the question first. Answer the question second. Because when you answer it first, like, I know it's because it comes to your head first, right? And you get it, and you're like, okay, is anybody gonna answer? Okay, is it time? I think it's time. And then you go, and it's just like anxiety builds up in you. But like, it's okay to just wait. One of these other three very knowledgeable individuals will know the answer, right? And then you can disagree with them after they spoke. Christina, as soon as the question "we the states" came up, everyone looked at you. And they were like, oh, it was in her testimony. She's gonna know it, right? And you hit it right out of the park. Like, it was perfect.
Thank you.
But like, what I would try and say for the rest of you to do is don't give it away that it's gonna go to her, right? Because if all three of your heads turned simultaneously, they're like, okay, we practiced this question. But other than that, I thought everybody did really good. Casey, I thought I saw lots of improvement from the last time that I watched you. And you being one of the last to speak, I thought was really important. Whereas you weren't speaking as much as the other three for a majority of the presentation, but you speaking last was really good, and it puts your presence in the judge's mind at the end.
You know your history of the Civil War and what went on prior to the Civil War, which is really good. So historically, you did a really good job as far as knowing what led up to and, in fact, what caused the Civil War and the Civil War itself, which is really good because I've been studying it for a long, long time, and I try to bring out these just kind of, I try to see. I need to see what knowledge you have, and you have very good knowledge on that. I don't know if maybe a little more constitutional application would have been a little better. You talked the historical part of it, which was really good, and you did bring up a few constitutional parts to it, but I think a little more might have been helpful. I know this question, one of the problems that we have is like Unit 3 is more the historical type question. You did bring up Judge Scalia, and you brought him up a couple of times, which was really good. So you brought it into the present, which is a good example. Maybe a little more of it. I mean, like right now, we can almost say that immigration is almost like slavery. If you really want to get technical about it, because here's another group that's kind of been, that's kind of supplanted, you might say, like the slaves were, and you might want to bring an example like that in if you need something current. Okay, just as a thought. Okay.
I thought your testimony was well done. I thought you all chimed in and contributed nicely there. In terms of making eye contact, I think it's good to make eye contact with the judges, just to try to make that eye contact, especially if you're not able to shake hands and do that kind of thing, so you can connect with the judges. And I think, Casey, be careful when you answer the one question on the Jim Crow laws that kind of follow up with what was already said. So just be careful when you answer that you're trying to add something new and not just repeating something. But otherwise, I thought you guys were very solid with your responses and very confident. You spoke very confidently, and that's a big part of it. So congratulations. Good job.
Good job.
Thank you.
Unit 2.